Hello. So we're about halfway through Winter's Crown, and I thought I'd finally pause and take some time to answer all the questions that have piled up for previous acts. I guess I also purposely refrained from doing a Q&A since I wanted to see how Ilishnish, the newly introduced MC, was received. Some reactions and interpretations were expected, while some were quite a surprise. Anyways, here we go. Where are we in the canon timeline? Act 4 of Winter's Crown ends during the third week of Upper Fire Month. For reference, this is roughly 4 months from Chapter 1, Act 1 of Birthright. Volume 12 of the Lane canon starts sometime before the middle of autumn, so a good 3 months until then, at least. Remedios' diplomatic contingent does not speak with Blue Rose and Reasties until after midwinter, then moves on to Eranthal. I hope that pins where we are in the timeline adequately. On Frost Dragons. For those unfamiliar with the source of our scaly new friends, Maruyama almost certainly nabbed them from 3.5e Dungeons & Dragons. Going by the details presented in Volume 11 of the light novels, he pretty much copy-pasted them wholesale. Appearance, behavior, traits, spell progression, abilities and ecology, including their traditional rivalry with frost giants and the tendency for the two races to enslave each other or want to, and other local species have all been kept almost entirely intact, or all just the same through some ridiculously uncanny coincidence. There are a few changes that Maru made to adapt them to his setting, however. The most notable differences are that the frost dragons in Overlord appear to mature about twice as quickly and have all of the relevant age categories consolidated into the ones you see, had their D20s DR, adjusted downwards by 2/3 RDS and were physically powered down to match this adjustment. Worm and Great Worm, the most powerful age categories, do not exist in Overlord. Appearance-wise, there is a single change, the vanilla central frill coming off of the back of their heads being replaced by a pair of horns. Their history always varies by setting, and Overlord has a fairly jobby backstory for dragonkind. So, following his lead, I went ahead and established their basic biology and nature through the Overlord canon sources and the 3.5e D&D sources, creating the baseline for frost dragons in Valkyrie's Shadow. The blessing and curse of flawless episodic memory. The current point in Valkyrie's Shadow is still highly character development centric while expanding the details of the setting according to our new dragon POV, so rather than their physical power relative to the average citizen, how a frost dragon mind works is actually one of the biggest factors in portraying Ilishnish. My expectation was for readers to start Ilishnish's POV and read her as if they were reading a human, but the thoughts and actions that were woven in over time to portray how she is not a human at all seemed to have a hard time sticking for many. I'll need to work on that, but I'm glad people like her character nonetheless. As mentioned as early as in Act 4 of Birthright, frost dragons come with a built-in flawless episodic memory, meaning that they remember all of their experiences perfectly. Their minds are built around this feature, so the way they think and remember things is entirely different than that of a human. Frost dragons are, in general, pretty dumb until they reach adult stage and older. They're little more than really smart predators as wimmerlings, and live like that until they are at the end of their juvenile age category. Ilishnish is petulant, snarky, arrogant and cunning because she is a rather successful frost dragon by their measure. Her perfect memory of what works, what doesn't, and how the world operates are a huge factor on her outlook and responses to various events. She gets lost 5 minutes from Eranthal, can't grasp abstract concepts easily, or even remember stuff that she reads if it's not presented in a recognizable way. All she has to work with is 100 years of personal experience in a completely different environment, and she's crashing headfirst into an unfamiliar new reality. Her mother, Calistran, recognizes what is going on right away, as she has lived centuries longer than Ilishnish and is well aware of what her daughter will have to go through to rapidly learn. Ilishnish has not had the benefit of having the deaths of Olisur Darkwater Orangelit burned into her mind like the rest of her family, and just saying what happened is not enough to make things click in her head. She's never experienced such a ridiculous thing before, so she cannot treat it seriously due to her biological operations. You see this mental function demonstrated in many scenes. She's a murder hobo when flying around the Azalisia Mountains, then suddenly turns cautious and timid when she's in Eranthal. She has no experiences to refer to that can help her make solid decisions about the new place, so she just goes in head first and feels her way around. Her actions in Theo Burkana are another example of how this works. It has been her home for the last century, and she can smoothly work her way around the dwarves in her old stomping grounds using her century of learning in dwarf culture and history. Ilishnish is quite smart, but the way her brain works makes her appear dumb or cute when she's way out of her depth. Of course, she doesn't stay like this forever, and after becoming familiar enough with Irantal, her confidence returns, until something new happens to her again. This brain function is even to the point where she nearly misses the Frost Dragon Neri when it starts being renovated because things have changed enough that she doesn't recognize it. Sheltia, of course, has figured out how to deal with frost dragons already, and starts whipping her into shape. Her actions and decisions focus on teaching through, sometimes painful, experience, knowing that frost dragons learn the fastest in that manner. She has a bit of her own fun along the way, but she's ultimately been charged to take care of them by Ainz, so she can't do whatever she wants, and she certainly can't kill them. You see the culmination of her initial efforts near the end of Act 4, after Ilishnish has been forcefully reshaped into a bare minimum standard of behavior without the dragon realizing that everything had been done on purpose until the end. Ish equals Verilyn. A bunch of the important, more biologically driven parts of this character are stated above, but we first see Ilishnish at the start of Winter's Crown, in what is pretty much her raw state. She is powerful and confident, as far as frost dragons of her age go, and has gained an advantage over most of her generation by pursuing the path of a draconic bard. She perceives things in a very limited way, as her own experiences are very limited, making her various plots, schemes and reactions appear hilariously ill-conceived to the reader. Stuff happens to her because she dives headfirst into unknown territory, acting on her obsolete or out-of-place experiences. She never stays down for long, however, constantly endeavoring to learn and gain advantages in her cunning sort of frost dragon way. Did I mention she's in heat? Yeah, that's a thing too, turning her more emotional and irrational, prone to natural and reactionary impulses and thinking. Despite this, she mostly keeps a lid on things and squeaks by, though there are also several instances of her unable to resist or unknowingly flaunting herself through actions and words. Poor Heginmil, who has been partnered with her for weeks of deliveries, has to deal with her pheromone cocktail too. Ilishnish's time under Sabos quickly leads to her picking up her dancer class, and she continues to explore the possibilities that it brings. She gains some understanding of Shiltir Bloodfallen and joins the Adventurer Guild. We start to see her more cool-headed, casually evil side after she finally lays her eggs and starts recovering from her hormone-enhanced roller coaster ride. Though we're only part of the way through her foundational arc, I think it's probably safe to say that certain distinct aspects of her character have been fairly well established and her potential for the future appears quite promising. Hopefully, my writing will distinguish her from a human character more and more as time passes, but, at the same time, entrench her as one of the comfortably familiar MCs of the story. She is an individual who becomes more skilled, confident and powerful as time goes on, but predictably gets dumped into the cycle of frost dragon learning whenever she goes somewhere new. Fuyotsuki, the battle dancer outfit that Shiltir has Ilishnish copy, means winter moon. Someone mentioned it in reference to a character in Evangelion, but the characters in Evangelion are named after ships from World War II. Fuyotsuki was an Akizuki-class destroyer of the Imperial Japanese Navy, who named their destroyers after natural phenomena or scenery, and the destroyer Fuyotsuki was named after the same scenery that the battle dancer outfit paints. Its appearance is designed to resemble a clear winter night with the moon overhead, giving it its overall motif. Conveniently or annoyingly, a character named Eula was released in Genshin Impact just before Ilishnish and Fuyotsuki made her debut. There are a weird number of overlaps in appearance between Ilishnish and Eula, particularly in their icy themes. Aside from appearance, however, nearly everything else is different about her. If you're curious about what Ilishnish and Fuyotsuki sort of looks like, check out Eula's character PV trailer on YouTube. It is not exactly the same, but it does give off the same feeling. Ludmilla Zaradnik. Ludmilla continues to mostly coast along, though she's had several deadly setbacks. Reconciling the strange gap between a martial arts user and a mundane combatant was an interesting exercise, as the light novels only vaguely demonstrate what they can do and how they work. Ludmilla's path to polar mastery is one of the answers I came up with that drew all the threads presented in canon into a more comprehensive, sensical package that can become an established rule set for the story going forward. It also defines the line where relying on even substantial combat skill is no longer sufficient to be effective in combat. Her upbringing as a martial noble addresses the strangeness in how martial arts are described to be learned. Canonically, it takes a long-ass time for people to learn normally, yet some characters can seemingly learn new ones within a very short span of time. Hansuken climbs rapid realization of their martial arts, the existence of combat schools mentioned in V7 and V14, Brain's new developments by V14, and some narrative counting of martial arts usage throughout the novels provide the basic framework. Hopefully it was put together convincingly for the new Adventurer Guild school proposal as well, and will become solidly logical within the narrative as martial arts come more and more into play. We also get a brief overview of Ludmilla's ancestry, and where her affinities come from. There's also a whiff of where her level cap might potentially be if all the right things line up. Bloodline awakening is not limited to player or dragon blood, it can also happen with native bloodlines, and more than a single bloodline can awaken at once. That being said, not all bloodlines are inherently strong. On the domain front, things go as peaceful as can be expected when you have nation-wrecking undead keeping potential troublemakers at bay, elder liches doing your data collection and accounting, and Mare providing perfect weather. The lizardmen are getting ready to move in, and she needs to figure out how to integrate them. Xenon is also starting to appear, beginning the track of magical development in Warden's Vale. The summer harvest has rolled in, and some people have probably already calculated the tax revenue for that. Clara also appears to have some evil good plan brewing. With Shiltia, Ludmilla grows closer, to the point of offering bottled meals. The possibility of vampire Ludmilla is also explored a bit, outlining the downsides that come with becoming a thrall and why maybe it's not such a good idea. Overall, Shiltia has become quite candid with her first New World vassal, though her vassal still observes the proper forms in public. Shiltia Bloodfallen. The bloody Valkyrie doesn't get much of a chance to be bloody these days, but she still appears to be doing quite well. What might be called a successful experience with her first native vassal has led her to seeking out more potential additions to her collection of useful people. This is one of the primary things that readers may notice with Shiltia. While many of the competent characters in Overlord are pillars of intellect or skill that seem to power themselves with the sheer strength of their own ability, Shiltia, despite being the strongest floor guardian, is very social by comparison, combining her intuition, charisma and authority to guide those who fall under her ever-growing shadow. She has her sights set on members of the Noble Quartet, has made professional connections with New World natives, and she has even seized the initiative with Elishnish, using her hard-earned knowledge and confidently employing her connections to mold the unwitting Frost Dragon into something more. Needless to say, her shadow will continue to grow, without most of her peers truly understanding just how influential she has become. Shiltia still enjoys making people squirm when she can, and subtly encourages her associates into doing what might be perceived to be evil things. Her post-Volume 11 transformation is in full swing, however, and she's working hard to catch up for lost time and opportunities, aiming to rise above her colleagues and earn recognition from her beloved master. Mare Bellofiore. Mare shows up quite a lot. He is probably in as many chapters as Shiltia so far in Winter's Crown. Well, he deserves more screen time anyways. Our favorite dark elf druid is actually pretty itchy to write. As a druid, he is driven by intuition, much like Shiltia. His resulting competency when it comes to what he does is through the roof. Yet he doesn't have the charismatic flair of Shiltia. All of his work is done wearing his timid and seemingly insecure guise. Well, most of the time. Sometimes people notice it slipping off, and he also slowly opens up to a few who he is comfortable enough to act assertively with, while enjoying broader popularity everywhere he goes. As far as non-Nazaric individuals go, Aura and Mare have picked up Mary as a tag-along for certain reasons, though Aura appears to have Mary in tow more often than Mare does. With Ludmilla, he appears to be quite comfortable, even coming over for dinner and working long hours together with a human noble on multiple occasions. She even gets a ring from him. And a collar. And a bath. Elishnish sticks to him, and considers him safe. His future as a Bishunin Gigakid is already kicking in, much to Aura's annoyance. Warden's Vale. Some significant changes are occurring in Warden's Vale, as Ludmilla's plans for having a small number of farming villages supporting a modest harbour town with a handful of fledgling advanced industries have evolved due to various events and circumstances. Demi-humans came over, then more demi-humans were dropped into a territory where the primary faith is a pro-human one, and the Leech herself is a member of their congregation. Though the absolute strength and authority of the Sorceress Kingdom does make for a smooth ride, it doesn't mean that everything will just work out when it comes to matters that raw power cannot directly solve. Major alterations to the land are underway, and Mayor is encouraging Ludmilla to extend her management over the southern border to preserve the natural state of the land and provide a place for non-human citizens to live. These new residents are sure to come in the future, and a new culture must develop or old ways will result in an ever-accumulating powder keg. On the human front, there is a shortage of temple staff and a cult with a pretty bad history has started moving in, though the first two seem nice enough, if not what the rest of the population might consider normal. Development plans have evolved from their humble state, yet they are still broad and undefined beyond "it would be nice if we could have X." The lady in charge has a lot of studying ahead of her before she can truly begin to advance in this new direction. The Aerial Transportation Network. One of the major handwaves of the Sorceress Kingdom in canon, one that just works and has many varying interpretations in the fandom. In most cases, since dragons are these huge, mythical monsters in most readers' minds, they end up having no upper limit to carrying capacity and thus unlimited endurance, range and all that. The frost dragons in canon also seem to be viewed as these convenient beasts of burden to readers, the character and intelligence of their V11 representations long forgotten. Arius seen in V12 is the last mention you ever get of them that suggests that they are even people. Even Irons seems to consider them as walking troves of crafting materials before handing them off to Schultier. This perception of frost dragons is reflected by various characters, and by their apparent treatment over the chapters where the Ilishnish is acting as one of the delivery dragons in the network. By defining the dimensions and capabilities of the frost dragons, a more concrete and thoughtful probably version of the Sorceress Kingdom's air transportation network was devised. It is one where logistical and organizational challenges exist, even with the extensive means available to Nazarick, and results in what eventually is described as the Vampire Post named after the highly visible vampire brides who serve their customers in every office where the dragon couriers are posted. They've mostly been working for free up north in their publicity run so far, but now that it's over, exploration of new routes, matters of efficiency, utility and profitability will begin to come under scrutiny. Rather than something that just works, the postal service in Valkyrie's shadow is meant to be a true fantasy postal service, with all the bells and whistles that one might expect from it. Zushiru. The Birth of a Quago, a Merchant was fun to write, a combination of New Worlder antics and setting exploration for the demi-human quarter of Irantal. He has his own little short story nested within the larger Ilishnish Act, where he transitions from the world he used to know to the one that he takes his first tentative steps into. It is a bit circular in nature, where the beginning has identical elements that are also present in the end, but his responses differ due to the developments in his one-night reformation. Schultier, Sebastian, Ilishnish, Leanne Wagner and Florian Garnier all serve as authoritative facets of his world. Schultier is the Crimson Harbinger of Death, the terrible being that single-handedly slaughtered most of his people on the Day of Sorrow, a reminder of the unassailable might of the Sorceress Kingdom, forcing the Quagoa to bend the knee or perish. Sebastian is a good NPC filled with similarly good views and intentions, yet his lack of results and the actions of the Sorceress Kingdom in the past make his idealistic expression ring hollow. Ilishnish conveys cynical views as a counterpoint that resonates with Zushiru, who understands that the world that they live in is one where might makes right. Leanne Wagner and Florian Garnier are New World natives who have already made the transition from past to present circumstances, nobles of Reistais who have become nobles of the Sorceress Kingdom. With the authority, resources and connections at their disposal, the two best friends extend their assistance to new citizens, trying to figure out how they can best fit into a place that is alien to them. Florian is warm, gentle and nurturing while Leanne is direct, aggressive and opportunistic, but their work is undeniably producing results. In the end, Zushiru falls to the power of money capitalism, the future that these two nobles present to him, demonstrated through a simple exercise that uses Zushiru's own ability and yields tangible results. In a world where might makes right and one is overshadowed by beings of unfathomable power, the weak still have to make their way through the world, a problem that the strong in many stories tend to not truly experience or understand, yet still take the time to preach about. Prestige classes, what? On a very basic level, Prestige classes are simply job classes that have certain requirements that a character must fulfill before they can gain levels in them. Due to said requirements, they are broadly stronger than basic job class levels, or allow a character to embark on certain progression paths that would otherwise require inefficient multi-classing. Rather than taking 50 fighter levels and 50 caster levels to try to become some sort of janky magical swordsman, you instead follow the progression path for a level 100 Eldritch Knight, or some other similarly themed prestige class line that allows you to avoid the pitfalls of multi-classing. Momonga's Eclipse class is an example of a prestige class that requires his necromancy-themed characters/race build to access. Ludmilla's Noble Fighter class requires that one possesses a certain aristocratic cultural tradition, while her Weapon Master class has prerequisites in adequate martial advancement. Ilishnish's Draconic Bard classes require one to be a dragon. These prestige classes also tend to portray certain concepts, resulting in strengths and weaknesses that would not normally manifest in a more basic class. Because the New World is a real world, there are logically far more prestige classes there than in Yggdrasil, and more than a few impossible examples appear in canon. These classes can vary widely in strength due to how they come into existence via cultural conceptualization. The character sheets of the noble fighters Nimble and Lenias of the Baharuth Empire show inefficient builds, yet they still qualify for their status as great imperial knights. On the opposite end, there are many civilian prestige classes like Runesmith, with very little combat potential. On Bards. A class barely touched upon in Overlord, one not from a Western D20 system. They are actually from a system called Sword World RPG, which originates from D20. But has been adapted into a more simplistic Japanese TTRPG. Being hit by a lawsuit for related reasons resulted in many changes on top of that. Beyond being a TTRPG in Japan, the novelizations, called replays have been adapted into video games and anime. Most famous amongst these replay settings is Forcelia, The World of Record of Lotus War, Rune Soldier and Legend of Crustonia. Bards have varied iterations in Sword World, from backline supporters to something resembling the more direct combat-oriented bards of D20. Sword World's class system, which includes some other classes you see in Overlord, combines major and minor archetypes, combining into what the character effectively becomes. For instance, an elf bard might take ranger and bard, the two archetypes effectively creating something like the vanilla bard that you see in Fksif. Combining sage plus bard will result in a lawmaster type bard. The starting race of the bard also influences the attribute array of the character, causing them to lean towards certain playstyles. A dragon bard, as you might imagine, is well suited to being a melee combatant, such as a warrior or rogue. As Overlord adapts its various inspirations into the mechanical baseline of a D20-like system, these nuances often become lost or melded into the setting in ways that can be confusing to readers. The first notable one being the matter of the Sage class, where one has no idea how it works unless you also know how Sage works in Sword World RPG. Since Sword World is originally derived from D20, however, it is easy to reverse the process once you do. The many variations of the Bard have their corresponding classes, either in the form of base job class levels or advanced prestige class levels. Racial attributes go into, well, racial class levels, or racial prestige classes. Ilishnish's backstory as a Draconic Bard has her naturally flow from her basic Draconic Bard class to her Draconic Dancer class, setting her on the path of an unconventional, yet undeniably powerful, melee-oriented build. And spellsongs. Spellsongs are also something from Sword World RPG. It is a system distinct from tier magic, and, within Sword World, it is not considered magic at all despite doing obviously magical things. In Overlord, it is also considered a skill/proficiency-based system rather than a magic system, alongside oratory abilities, martial arts and the other supernatural senses and abilities that come with class levels. I think the way I describe its effects muddle things somewhat as well, which I'll have to edit at some point and be careful of using certain magic-related terminology in the future. What spellsongs are capable of range widely. In Sword World, you have simple songs such as ones that provide a regeneration-like effect, various cosmetic things, or straight-up RP stuff like calling birds just for the sake of having birds flying around you like a singing Disney princess. There are also several potent spellsongs that I question existing in Yggdrasil, like mana regen/degen songs, powerful CC effects, skill/ability disables, spell jamming, and a level drains. In canon, we see that Maru does not limit himself to this list, adding spell songs reminiscent of the performances of Western D20 bards, improving various mechanical aspects of the characters within its area of effect. As with most things in the New World, composition of new spell songs is a possibility, so there will be a wide range of things on display. In the hands of someone like Ilishnish, they become devastating when employed, both in battle and outside of it. Magical healing, fast healing and regeneration. Someone made an astute observation about how, canonically, magical healing not only restores damage taken by the target, but reverses beneficial things like muscle and bone strengthening as well. In D20, there are actually multiple forms of magical and supernatural healing. Depending on the setting, what spells/items/etc. cover what can vary a bit, and this is no different in Overlord. Magical healing is the instant healing effect that accompanies spells and Yggdrasil red healing potions. Traditionally, it doesn't cure amputations and old wounds, but I'm pretty sure Maru changed that for our agricultural purposes. It's also more flashy in combat narratives if it is more potent than its usual TTRPG iteration. Fast healing only superficially exists in Overlord. New World mid-quality healing potions have something like a fast healing effect, but they are effectively magical healing due to the fact that it reverts bodily changes, the more recent example being Ludmilla's blood mysteriously vanishing after she fills the decanter and drinks a potion. A vampire's regeneration is also traditionally a fast healing effect, but it got changed to regeneration. Traditionally, fast healing doesn't cure amputations and old wounds, making it essentially non-existent in canon. All the effects shown in canon are either magical healing or regeneration, the latter making certain races that traditionally have fast healing way more powerful than they usually are. Regeneration is something most readers familiar with this genre are aware of. An effect over time that restores even amputated body parts to full functionality. Certain races have certain weaknesses that result in this trait being disabled, such as a troll's weakness to acid and fire. Regeneration rates differ by race, and there are healing spells that are actually a regeneration buff, such as the one that Shiltir employs. Regeneration does not revert beneficial bodily changes, as evidenced by trolls in canon not being stick figures because they can't bulk up. Ilishnish's Song of Restoration is a regeneration effect, so those poor disciples in the Justice Dragon Dojo won't be left wondering why they haven't built up any muscles. The Azure Sky, Iron Fist Institute for Promising Children, otherwise known as Yuri's Orphanage in canon. I ended up stealing the name from one of the associated mangas. As mentioned in the Pleiades Days side story, Yuri has been granted the full support of Nazarick to build the orphanage of her dreams. This is no simple apartment where orphaned children are stowed away in cramped bunk space. It's a fully fledged complex where everything Yuri Alpha believes is necessary for raising children has been built. In addition to adequate living space for the orphans, it has educational and recreational facilities, a kitchen that also performs charity work, a hospital, a divination chamber for Negredo, offices for the staff, a spacious yard, and a vegetable field. There may also be various security systems present, so intruders should beware. A handful of Yuri's sisters come visiting at various frequencies. Solution has been there before early on, but does not make a point to visit. Nobrol doesn't visit at all. Entama and CZ come by quite a bit, while Lupu comes in frequently to cause mischief. If one were to rank the popularity of the Pleiades amongst the orphans, it would be Entama greater than Lupus, Regina greater than CZ greater than Yuri. Spider Mom best mum. Odds and ends. Reader comments that I might have answers for. Ludmilla not having any martial arts is an interesting way to explain her deaths. But overall I don't think it holds up. She has been the only person to die in all her runs so far. You even wrote that Themis' armor was near spotless when Ludmilla came to. Themis was just another lowly aspiring priestess when she became an adventurer around the same time Ludmilla did. Ludmilla is a conservative tactician, and her parties tend to run full mana even by the end. The reason why Themis is untouched was that, even with Ludmilla dead, they still nuked the crap out of everything. Por más buena que si Ludmilla, sentidos como el olfato serán siempre inferiores a por ejemplo un hombre legato. Un hombre legato debió detectarla por su olor, while Ludmilla un debería ser al menos 5 niveles más débil. The prevailing winds come from the north in this region of the world, which has been shown and even exploited in past acts. The harbor village is south of the lizardman camp, so catching her scent would be difficult. That being said, she outclasses these particular lizardmen in the stealth department. Just one thing that kind of rankles on me regarding the story. How are Nazarik's people so understanding regarding Shoshana? If I recall correctly, they should easily take offense to anyone claiming to be the god of death like that. Even if Ainz himself gives the order to keep the peace, it seems odd that there hasn't been an overt, that I can recall anyway, display of disdain towards the claims of the religion of the Six. Shiltir just outright ignoring a slight against her master like that seems completely out of character to me. Unless lesser creatures that weren't created by the supreme beings are allowed to believe whatever delusions they want. But then again, even Sabos took exception to claims on dominion over death by a lesser being. Nazarik has explicit instructions from Ainz to leave religion alone. They also have a pretty dismissive view on gods in general, like how Shiltir describes her own deity, Canabel, in canon. Any affront that they might have displayed or acted on has not surfaced in canon, so it will not surface here. Narratively, they should care little for the gods that are worshipped by lesser beings. Rather than being understanding, they are just dismissive. Sabos' actions against Devonok only happened after he received orders to act. He didn't run off and murderize the Six Arms the second he heard about the guy. I'm sure Ainz's obviously deep and insightful policy in regards to the Sorceress Kingdom's stance on the temples will result in a Sasuga one of these days. A claro que me gusta tu fanfic tu temática y te admiro por escribir tantos capítulos y tu enorme conocimiento de Overlord, tu humor me gusta excepto por la confusión de la admina de la supuesta relación de limón y no be solo por viajar juntos y son hombre y mujer, y no se pregun sobre la especie de no be y si tiene género, y la admina me sorprende que no pregunte de la religión de Shelter y sobre los nombres que mencionaba como su creador y que Shelter no mencionara a los seres supremos. This avoidance of religious topics is due to the secular nature of their government, both for Riastais and the Sorceress Kingdom. Religion is only framed in terms of their lawful place in the fabric of society, and it's essentially taboo for a noble to push religion too much, as it can be construed to be interference in politics and grounds for censure. Thus, it's safer to just not say anything at all unless it is necessary, or perhaps as a form of explanation, as Ludmilla does a few times. El temor a los aventureros es tonto, el adibio detectar el poder de todos los aventureros allí, solo los seres muy débiles con mucha sutilidad podrían usar la creada que ocultan su fuerza con items mágicos, habilidades o talentos. At the point of this comment, Ilishnish doesn't even realize that she's seen an adventurer already. They are a threat of unspecified appearance, only known to her by the records and rumors they leave behind. She doesn't know that adventurer is a vocation, she thinks it's a powerful race of some sort. You see how quickly she adapts once she realizes the truth at the end of the act. La carrera cambio no debería ser influida por ninguna profesión, no es talento como el esposo de Henry. La carrera cambio es como esos cosas parte de la besta gremio en los juegos que he jugado donde convierte artículos en materiales o dinero. No es un item que no se compra ni se puede conseguir otro si así fuera tendrían varias tarelas y como es una extensión del gremio si está negado o destruida volver a aparecer en Nazarick automaticamente según creo con lo que he leído de Overlord. Assuming that I'm reading this correctly and the poster is talking about the exchange box, I might as well order Pandora's actor to put one of that woman's blades into the treasury's shredder and see what happens. The shredder? It was only when he heard Albedo's surprised voice that Ainz recalled the proper name of that item. That would be the exchange box. Someone with merchant-type skills can get better prices when using it. Order Pandora's actor to take Nirata-san's form and use his skill. Overlord, Volume 4 Prologue. The exchange box in canon renders any object processed by it into a fraction of its base material value. Characters with merchant-type skills improve this rate of exchange, which is why Momonga has Pandora's actor use Nirata's form, in order to use the exchange box while employing Nirata's merchant-type skills. In the Act 4, Chapter 17 scene, Pandora's actor is doing the same with each of the copied merchants to collect data for comparison. Wormling and juvenile? Not dragonling and young? The other two, are they racial classes too? They are the same racial classes. It is a streamlining of racial categorization, to avoid confusion in the future for this story. Maru does specifically have Dragonling and Young Overchild and Youth on FDL's character sheet. There are actually 12 Dragon Age categories in D20, and Maru scrunched them into half-time and knocked off the top 2, picking names out of the remaining. I ended up choosing the categories that best define each stage represented. Musings on writing multiple major POVs. Winter's Crown would actually be 2 separate volumes if I had divided the story by plot like Maruyama did with volumes 2 to 7 of Overlord. The plot lines of the 2 characters are separate for most of Winter's Crown, yet occur in roughly the same time frame. Since it's a web publication, I thought I would try dividing them into acts instead. I'm still actually on the fence about it, but I think the timing is sort of there. People ask about the other character towards the end of the act, so it seems okay. The other option was to break it up even more, with characters getting 3 to 6 chapter segments and bouncing the story back and forth that way. Zushiru's mini-arc was actually a bit of an experiment with that, but, as a minor character, he doesn't threaten to overshadow Elishnish's act. 2 major characters might conflict, however, especially if they each have a major, independent plot going. Some discussion on this might be enlightening. Next up. The next act will follow the demi-human character briefly introduced at the beginning of Winter's Crown, Act 3. Since it begins with Happy Farm, I should give fair warning because, well, it's Happy Farm. For those unfamiliar with the canon material, it's the personal project of Demiurge, a monumental pile of atrocities that visits suffering upon many different races. It, and its various findings, have been discussed or mentioned offhandedly in previous acts, but now we're actually going there. The tone of this act is fairly grim compared to the relatively light-hearted stuff that has come before. Once again, thank you for reading Valkyrie's Shadow. The stench of smoke, unwashed bodies and weeks of waste rose into the air around the cages piled high in the Dale of Defiance. QRS felt the cool metal bars of his prison, absently tightening and releasing his grip. It was not steel, nor any other metal he knew of. He could snap steel bars, fold mithril plate, and warp even stronger metals, but there was no give at all with these. The bars of this cage would not even budge in the slightest. The metal cages were also incredibly light. Gusts of wind would set the towers swaying, and everyone would stay very still, silently trying to will their makeshift prison to stop rocking back and forth. Being placed near the top, it was akin to being set on top of a tree, even the slightest movement or breeze sending him slowly teetering this way and that. QRS looked down. It was roughly 50 meters to the ground. In the event of a collapse, he figured that he would easily survive, and he mused over whether it would jar the hinges of the cages loose or damage them in some other way so he could escape. He never made his own attempt, however, for few others could survive the fall. Not that he would have cared for anyone else, but they had put his son in the cage beside his. At first, QRS thought it a relief that he could see that he was still alive, but, over time, he suspected that they were using his son to ensure his docile behavior. And, so, the days passed. During the day, they all baked together in the sun, praying for the evening to come sooner. At night, they shivered in the cold, praying for the warmth of the sun. When it rained, they cupped their hands or whatever they had and opened their mouths to the sky. They licked the soiled metal bars of their cages for every bit of moisture they could get. They were not allowed to relieve themselves elsewhere, either, so had to simply do it where they were. That particular discomfort mostly abated, much to the relief of everyone, since they were only fed once every few days. A telltale quiver ran through the bars of his cage, distinctly out of time with the rocking of the wind. The quiver came again, and QRS exploded into action, twisting around and leaping forward to smash his fist into the bars on the opposite inside. "Fuck off, creep." The form looming behind his son's cage recoiled at his shout. His son jerked awake with a cry, scurrying to the opposite corner of his tiny prison. The movement of the three jolted the entire tower, and a great wail rose from below. The top of the tower swayed in wide circles, offering a roiling view of the landscape below, but QRS didn't give a damn. He rose to his feet, glaring murder at the figure who had been stalking in to take a swipe at his son. Across from him stood the towering, four-legged form of a Zoroaster, feline eyes gleaming at him from the shadows of its cage. The sparse meals that they were allowed had clearly taken a toll on its form, its tan fur hanging in flaps where its powerful body had melted away from hunger. As they faced off with one another, a guttural growl rose from the barrel chest of its humanoid torso. The features of its cougar-like head flinched, and then the being turned away. Perhaps if it had been a more regular situation, QRS might have felt a sliver of pity for the Zoroaster. Then again, if it was a more regular situation, it wouldn't have growled at him and QRS would be preoccupied with killing it instead. Zoroaster prided themselves in discipline, their mastery over their bestial selves. Letting loose such a growl was considered a shameful thing, a sign that they couldn't rein in their savage nature. The weeks of borderline starvation that they were being subjected to was slowly, but surely breaking the Zoroaster's will. "Hey, what's that racket?" A deep voice snarled up the tower from below. The prisoners collectively hushed. Clank, clank, clank. The sound of a metal rod being drawn against the bars of the cages slowly traveled around the base of the tower. No one dared utter a sound. Clank, clank, clank. For minutes, it went on. Minutes that seemed like hours. From down below, came an Armat's distinct whimper. Clank, 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 clank. The sound picked up, accompanied by the pounding of heavy steps. The metal rod slammed against the bars of a cage somewhere north of QRS. Answer the question. Hi-ee. The wickedly clawed hands of the fiend below gripped the bars, giving them a good shake that could be felt across hundreds of cages. I said answer the question, you stupid animal. Piteous, incomprehensible, noises only rose in return as the Armat cowered in terror. The creak of metal sounded as the cage was opened, and the fiend reached in to snatch the Armat out of the corner of its prison. It held the rodent beastman high in the air, a good 4 meters off of the ground. The Armat squirmed weakly, continuing to moan and whimper. If you savages can't say anything useful, the fiend lashed its reptilian tail against the ground, throwing up clods of cracked soil, then shut up. The Armat was violently flung to the ground, bouncing weakly with a grunt. Shut up. The metal rod rose and fell as the fiend brutally clubbed the Armat into compliance. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. The words were punctuated by each blow. All around, the prisoners in the caged towers witnessed the scene in grim silence. Members of dozens of races were incarcerated here, yet they all shared the same uncomprehending expressions of horrified disgust, each according to their own kind. There was no purpose in this, no need. No hunger, no challenge, no sport or competition. Not that any of it mattered to their fiendish warden, a devil with reptilian wings that spanned 6 meters across, its sinuous form clad in oily black scales that caused the eye to slip right off of them. A being of pure, methodical evil. This was a game that played out every day, seeking out the most fragile and sensitive of wills in their number. Answering the question didn't actually matter, nor did any pleas or reasoning. Nothing that you did mattered, not after it singled you out. A foregone conclusion stretched into violent farce using any flimsy excuse it could find. Even as the rod continued to rise and fall, the horned, reptilian head did not express even the slightest hint of fury or sadistic glee. It simply did what it did because that was what it did. The tower shuddered as the Armat was tossed back into its cage, bars clanging shut behind it. The warden continued on its rounds. QRS gripped the bars of his cage to still his own trembling hands. He stared at them dully. Perhaps it was not the cages that were strong, but it was he that had become weak, just like the Zoroaster. Gnawing hunger accompanied him throughout the day, and his body was less substantial than it was before. His eyes ran down his thin, shaking fingers, following the once mighty arms where his slackened hide was draped over emaciated flesh, the outline of bone, plain to see. The thick bands of muscle and fat over his torso, once able to absorb powerful cuts and blows, were all but gone, and his ribs protruded over the curving hollow of his stomach. How long had it taken to shrivel up into this pitiful husk? Weeks? Months? Like the Zoroaster, like QRS and his son, the others around him appeared to fare no better. Evening fell, and more of their fiendish captors appeared. They brought with them a number of tables and benches, and a few carts with sheets of cloth draped over them were drawn in their wake. The prisoners in their towers of cages all watched as they moved below, arranging what QRS could only think of as tables for dining. Row upon row, Places for many dozens were made. There were even empty platters laid down at regular intervals, though no utensils could be seen. The cloth covering the nearest cart was lifted, revealing pitchers and small, wooden cups. They, too, were arranged along with the platters on the table. The figures below moved back and forth, filling them with the clear liquid. QRS could not smell anything new mixing into the rancid air, so he thought it should be water. He swallowed painfully through his parched throat. A clinking sound filled the air as some sort of devil with a great number of heavy, shimmering chains draped over its humanoid body went around. Several cages nearer to the ground were opened, but the prisoners within were too wary to leave. What is this? A voice drifted up fearfully. What are you doing? Feeding time. The devil's voice grated in the air like the sound of its chains. The prisoner continued to cower in her cell. Not hungry? The devil said, fine by me. The rattling of its metal links filled the air as the devil started to close the cage. No, wait. The prisoner staggered forward. I'm hungry. I want to eat, I need. The bars banged shut, drowning out her voice. The devil locked the cage, which still contained the prisoner, and moved on. No one else voiced their hesitation, shuffling up to the long tables and taking their places. A group of smaller fiends below took wood from the wagons, forming a long pile. They placed a huge slab of black metal over it. A shadow floated up before QRS, who ignored it as he watched the proceedings below. The sound of the cage beside him being unlocked finally drew his attention. His son had his back pressed to the rear of the cage again, looking fearfully towards a demon that had flown up on bat-like wings. The cage opened, and she reached inside. The boy whimpered. Wait, QRS said. What are you doing? Feeding time, the demon replied in a sultry voice. QRS glanced back down to the tables slowly being filled with the prisoners who were awaiting their meal. Go on, boy, he said. You need to stay strong. He looked his son in the eye and nodded slowly. After a moment's hesitation, the boy stepped forward hesitantly to be brought down. QRS' gaze followed them, and they alighted on the ground. Rather than having him go to a table, however, the demon threw his son face down onto one of the carts. Nearby, the chains of the devil from before seemed to spring to life of their own accord, winding around the boy and binding him tightly. QRS pressed his face to the bars of his cage, nostrils flaring. Hey, he shouted down at them, what the hell are you? A knife glinted in the firelight, and a devil of the same type as their warden carved out his son's left haunch with several deft motions. The boy's agonized cries filled the air, and the slab of flesh was tossed over to land on the metal plate placed over the fire. The sound of sizzling flesh joined his son's screams. QRS slammed the bars of his cage, rocking it back and forth as his enraged shouts joined the sounds of his screaming child. The prisoners all around him shouted to stop rocking the cages. The figure at the slab produced some metal implements and worked on preparing the haunch, slicing it up and cooking it thoroughly before dumping it in a large metal bowl to the side. A fiend carried the bowl of weight towards the tables, serving out portions to the awaiting diners. They hesitantly stared down at the prepared meal, then at one another, but eventually, their hunger took hold and they shoveled fistfuls of QRS son greedily into their mouths. The bowl returned to the cooking fire, by where QRS son lay pale as blood pooled under the cart. The boy could only half look at the approaching butcher with its gleaming knife as it approached. Tears of anger, frustration and grief rolled down QRS' face as he stared down powerlessly from his cage with clenched fists. At least his child would not need to suffer for much longer. Light cure wounds. Healing magic passed over his boy with its telltale glow, but the damage to his body remained. A fiend with a thin wooden board standing nearby wrote something down. She looked up from the board and held up a finger, and a gaunt figure nearby in a black leather apron cast a spell. Middle cure wounds. The fiend with the clipboard looked down at the cart, her pen scrawling over paper. After a moment, she looked back up and nodded. Middle cure wounds. On the cart, his son's leg appeared to be healed completely, and color had returned to his skin. His shallow breathing grew less ragged. The devil with the knife moved again, taking the freshly healed haunch away. His son cried out in agony, joined shortly after by the sound of his sizzling flesh. The macabre feast continued for hours, until several towers of cages surrounding the makeshift dining area were fed. Sometime along the way, QRS' whitened knuckles gradually lost their strength. He curled up against the bars of his cage, dry sobs racking his body. "You're a real piece of work." The disgusted voice of the Zoroaster sounded from behind him. QRS turned his head. The bestial face of the prisoner behind him twisted into a snarl, yellow eyes gleaming as it spat out its commentary. "I didn't know," QRS replied weakly. "How could I know?" The Zoroaster turned away, uninterested in his words. "What now, this again?" A hobgoblin said from another cage. "I don't know how you can keep up that act. I'd spit on you, but you're not worth the moisture." "I'm not." QRS swallowed his anger as he tried to clear away his confusion. "I'm not acting." How could you say that? That's my kid down there." "That's what you said last time," an ape-like goblin said from below, "and the time before that, and how many times is it now? We're all sick of it. How can you even live with yourself? You're an insult to your name." What do you mean? What last time? Hey, answer me." QRS words met with a uniform silence, and, everywhere he turned, everyone pointedly looked away. A dark figure rose from below. The cage beside him opened. QRS turned to see the demon tossing his son back into his cell. The boy fell to his hands and knees upon being released, trembling so violently that the cage rattled around him. No one voiced any complaint. He looked pale but healthy. His skin over where his flesh was taken again and again was clean and unmarred. He wavered unsteadily near the opening of the cage until the booted heel of the demon kicked him sharply from behind, sending him sprawling inside. QRS pushed himself against the bars of his cage, reaching out with his hand. "Boy. Are you all right?" "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I didn't know." His son silently rolled over, turning his back to him. "He's such a good boy," the demon hovering outside remarked with a wicked smile. "He obeys every single time, no matter how many weeks have gone by. He respects you so much. If only everyone had such an excellent father." QRS roused with a start, sitting bolt upright with the first faint gray of the dawn. He forced away the cobwebs of his sleep-addled awareness, driven by the shadows of a paranoid fear. Ignoring the cramps and bruises from sleeping on the small and hard floor of his cage, he forced his mind to work. How much time had passed? Days? Weeks? No, months. He remembered, or at least he thought he remembered. Though the dreary days trapped behind bars blurred into one another, events and scenes could be clearly recalled. Months since Yaldabaoth fell upon the Dale of Defiance. From his vantage, he could see that the river was swelling, the harsh dryness of the land abating somewhat, and hardy shrubs turning lush and green. He didn't remember the specific turning of days, but he did remember when he had come here, and how much should be missing from his recollection between now and then. His cage had been placed where he was currently stuck, atop a pile of identical cages stacked near as high as the tallest treetops in the valley. He had watched as more towers of cages were stacked around him, then more across the river. More clusters of towers rose up and down the river on either side, stretching on over the horizon. The scenery was reminiscent of the view from the top of the massive human wall in the west, painting a distant skyline of their clustered settlements and towers. There were tens, no, hundreds of thousands of prisoners, stuffed in cages and left exposed to the elements, half-starved and slowly going mad. How many more cages were there? What was the point? Did Yaldabaoth mean to hunt down and imprison every free being in the Abelian Hills? The sound of fiends working in the morning gloom turned his attention to the ground below. Over a half-dozen moved about. Where did they come from, anyway? Yaldabaoth had at least a small army, judging by the number of places where the cages rose and what it took to tend to them. Yet there was no news or sign of invasion preceding his ruinous arrival in the Abelian Hills. Was it some tribe's fault? Some foolish ritual enacted in the midst of a festival commemorating the fall of the demon gods that doomed them all? Maybe an imp or some other weak fiend for entertainment, but he couldn't imagine how summoning an imp could call forth a demon god instead. There were powerful mystics in his tribe, who might have a real explanation for Yaldabaoth's appearance, but QRS was not counted amongst them. He was a warrior through and through, and all of his knowledge of warfare and personal combat availed him little when pitted against these two often stupendously powerful beings. "Need to pick up a few for the labs," a thin, reedy voice floated up from below. "Which one?" the warden asked. "I3. "It's starting already?" "Still a ways off," the reedy voice replied, "but we've got prep work." "What do you need?" That bunch over there looks fine." Any diseases or other weirdness crop up recently? Nothing the torturers haven't reported. Then we're good, right? Papers? Right, we didn't need those before. QRS squinted down at the pair conversing below. The huge figure of the winged warden blocked the view of the other fiend from his angle. The other fiends were hulking brutes, though nowhere near as imposing. Behind them, a short procession of beasts drawing some sort of travois waited. "Looks like you're clear," the warden said. "Thanks, bud." The fiends below started moving about again, unloading cages from the towers and adding them to the caravan nearby. QRS counted 6 cages, whose occupants remained mostly silent. The one who did make noise simply had his cage dropped from where it was being flown across from, then roughly rolled over to its destination. This was something QRS remembered. Twice a day, fiends would drop by, one group to take prisoners away, and the other bringing new ones in. Unlike today, most of the outbound prisoners went to something called processing. Regardless of their destination, they were never seen again. It was one of many similar scenes that repeated itself for weeks and months, and QRS nodded to himself as he watched the caravan vanish to the south. They would be left to waste away for the remainder of the day, and nothing further would happen until the evening. That was when the problems started. He could remember the last time. He could remember his son being taken to feed the masses of slavering prisoners. He could also remember the condemnation of those surrounding him, the mocking voice of the female demon with her bat-like wings. They told him it wasn't the first time, that it had played over for weeks and months, but he only remembered the last time. The only person he could trust to confirm their story was his son, and he refused to speak with QRS at all. Evening came, accompanied by the sound of cages being opened and prisoners being led to their tables. The female demon flew up towards them. At the sound of keys being withdrawn from a leather thong hanging from her waist, QRS went over to the edge of his cage. "Wait," he said. The demon turned her attention towards QRS, a question vaguely painted over her smooth features. "Take me," QRS told her. The demon tilted her head at his words, glowing amber eyes flickering under her fluttering lashes. "Take you?" Her venomously sweet voice seemed to coax him. "Why? Should you not see to the needs of your child first?" QRS' cheek twitched. She was still trying to convince him to send his son? Did she not know? If he let on the idea that he knew what was going to happen, how would things change, or was she testing him? He thought that, perhaps, he had developed a resistance or immunity against whatever was being used to cut out his memories. Everything seemed to play out in the same manner as what he could recall, so he figured that they did not know that anything was amiss. Perhaps everyone was in league with one another, putting on an act to ensnare him in a web of lies. In that case, who was lying to him, and what was the truth? Maybe whoever was doing it to him had just messed up. Or maybe they just grew bored of tormenting QRS and his son. Maybe. But maybe didn't matter, he would do what needed to be done. "I'm hungry, damn it." His hoarse shout painfully cracked from his parched throat. "Let me go down before I start chewing off my arm." Out of the corner of his vision, his son looked up at him with wide eyes. It took all QRS had to not look in the boy's direction to offer him some form of reassurance. The demon appeared to silently ponder his words for several moments, then flapped over and opened the door of his cage instead. "Very well," she smiled, "we'll have you join us for dinner first." A long, sinuous tail reached out and wrapped around his body, and he winced as its tiny barbs fixed themselves into his skin. The demon carried him away, gliding down to the ground. QRS stole a glance upwards after he was set back down and saw his son staring at him from high above. At least he would be spared, even if it was just this once. QRS wobbled on his weakened legs for a moment before he was tossed onto the awaiting cart. Even after resolving to submit himself, he couldn't help but struggle in a vain attempt to escape what he knew would come. He felt hot chains close around his ankles and wrists, with more length wrapping over his torso. In the end, he was bound so tightly that he could only look down over the edge of the cart, watching the dancing shadows of the fiends around him in the firelight. "Hey," a deep voice sounded from behind him. "What's this?" The ground thumped as the lower portion of the Devil Butcher entered QRS' field of view. Layered in ruddy, reptilian scales, the splayed claws of its long-toed feet dug into the dusty soil. "Dinner," the female demon replied lightly. A hand came down on QRS' leg, and he squirmed as it roughly squeezed and prodded him. The other one looked a lot better. Annoyance filtered through into the butcher's rumbling voice. You trying to drive down the quality of my cuisine? It'll be a change of pace, the shadow of the female demon shrugged. They must be getting tired of the same thing all the time. The devil butcher let out a dubious sound in his deep voice, and a corner of QR's mind agreed. How would it be any different? They were the same. A sharp gasp filled QR's lungs as something lanced into his leg, sending white-hot pain up his body. Despite his efforts to hold them in, grunts of agony filtered through gritted teeth as a piece of his leg was torn away. The sizzle of the grill rose, and the aroma of his own cooking flesh filled his nostrils. The clinking of metal utensils joined in, creating a sick caricature of cooking for several minutes, then stopped. I knew it, the deep voice came from the direction of the grill. This one's tougher. Our guests are going to have a tough time choking it down, especially the ones without any teeth left. All the better, the female demon said lightly. Maybe, but are we allowed? The butcher asked. Yaldabaoth told us not to take our fun too far. If we waste these materials selfishly, it'll be fine. The female demon's voice lilted lazily. It's not as if they'll die if they can only manage a bit this one time. The sound of utensils working the grilling meat continued as QR's vision faded. He trembled under the chains, involuntarily shuddering as blood steadily dripped down onto the dry yellow clay below. Order for table 1. The butcher called out. A dark veil of weakness draped over this awareness by the time the empty bowl returned. Another presence came near to him. This isn't the same one, a voice said suspiciously. It was the pale, gaunt fiend with the black apron. Just heal him already, the female demon told him. He looks nearly done. MMH. The black apron drew closer with the shuffling of hidden feet. Gangly arms that nearly dragged their knuckles over the ground came into view. The fiend raised his hands, casting a spell. Light Cure Wounds. QRS felt the healing magic wash over him, restoring a portion of his injury. With it, however, came the return to awareness and the world of pain that it delivered. He winced and swallowed the rising agony, fighting to regain his composure against the raw sensation. The black apron stood by quietly, and QRS thought he could feel the fiend watching him closely. This one does not even sing, the aproned fiend lamented in wistful tones. The boy was far superior, his voice so pure and sweet, so easy to tune. Blame her for picking him out today, the butcher grumbled. Oh whatever, the female demon sniffed dismissively. We can just go back to the usual tomorrow. Were they trying to elicit a response out of him? QRS held his tongue, there was no point in responding either way. The aproned fiend continued casting his spells. Middle Cure Wounds. Middle Cure Wounds. He felt his condition improve, the waves of searing pain replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. Eh? The aproned fiend's confused voice sounded after the third healing spell was cast. The others standing over QRS shifted to turn towards him. What? The female demon asked. Legs nowhere near done, the aproned fiend answered. Uh-oh. Damn it. The butcher cursed, I knew you shouldn't have changed things up. How should I know? The female demon complained, they're all so puny. What's 1 or 2 low-tier healing spells? What should we do? The aproned fiend said, I still have mana. Don't you dare, the butcher cut him off. We're on a budget, we'll just fall behind even more if you use them on this mana sponge. He won't die now, right? The female demon reasoned, I can throw him back up in his cage and he can heal up on his own. We'll just stick to the young ones now, yeah? Lord D. The female demon's voice was cut off by a gasp that faded suddenly, as if she had been snatched away. A wet, crunching noise filled the air for a handful of heartbeats. The body of the demon who had retrieved QRS from his cage landed on the ground in front of him, rolling twice before coming to a stop. She had been wound so tightly on herself that what remained resembled a rag squeezed dry of moisture. Arms and legs, wings, tail and head, everything was twisted into a single gory length of bloody flesh and bone. Demon Emperor Yaldabaoth, if you please, a smooth, unforgettable voice joined the conversation. Apologies, Demon Emperor, the butcher's deep voice trembled. We were just preparing dinner, but there's been a misallocation of resources? It is as you say, Demon Emperor. That's not good, Yaldabaoth said. Not good at all. Our work relies on smooth, efficient operations. The blood, sweat and tears of our precious charges depend on the healing touch of our torturers. Yes, Demon Emperor, the Horned Devil said. We'll return to our usual routine, it won't happen again. QRS idly entertained the idea of throwing himself at the nearby Yaldabaoth. He tested his restraints, but they were as tight and unyielding as before. What should we do with this one? The aproned fiend asked. Well, Yaldabaoth pondered. Complete his healing. The laboratories have a large shipment on the way, but it will be some time yet until it arrives. He can work off his debt to us there. We'll prepare a Cajun transportation. The warden joined the conversation. Which laboratory should we send him to, Demon Emperor? The new one will do, Yaldabaoth replied. I-5. It will be done, Demon Emperor. The thud of weighty footsteps approached, sending chips of dried clay dancing over the ground. QRS attempted to turn his head towards the sound and was rewarded by a heavy blow to the temple. The world reeled, and he struggled to regain himself. A second blow came crashing in, and oblivion stole his awareness away.